But have no fear, only those who are unmuted and in the nice little yellow box will be recorded for posterity. Also, another quick note before we hand things over to Gloria from GMALL. If you have any questions at any time for our author tonight, just type them in the chat. I will save them up and then ask them when we get to the Q&A. We are lucky tonight to have an event that is co-sponsored by the Green Mountain Academy of Lifelong Learning. So you're going to hear from Gloria Palmer, who is the executive director of it. So Gloria, tell us a little.
Okay, so I would like to thank everyone for joining us here tonight. It's always a pleasure to work with the Northshire Bookstore to partner on an event like this. And it's an extreme honor to have Governor Kunin with us today and Barbara Morrow participating in this program. So I'm so appreciative to both of them and all of you for joining us. If you don't know anything about Green Mountain Academy, I hope that you'll visit our website. We have lectures just about every Tuesday evening, 5:30 to 7 throughout the summer and beyond. So we hope to see you on Zoom and hope that someday we can be in person again. Thank you.
Thanks, Gloria. I have been really looking forward to tonight's event. And many thanks to the Green Mountain Academy of Lifelong Learning for the support with this event and getting the word out. Really appreciate it. It's my great pleasure to once again introduce Madeleine May Kunin, this time for her debut collection of poetry, Red Kite, Blue Sky. She served as the governor of Vermont, the U.S. ambassador to Switzerland, and the U.S. Deputy Secretary of Education. She is the first and only woman to be elected as a governor of Vermont, and the only woman in U.S. history to win a third term as governor, among many other firsts in her career. She is currently the James Marsh Professor at Large at the University of Vermont, where she gives guest lectures on feminism and women in politics. She serves on the board of the Institute for Sustainable Communities, a non-governmental organization that she founded, and she recently launched Emerged Vermont to encourage and support women in politics. She is the author of several books, including her recent memoir, Coming of Age. Her new book of poetry, Red Kite, Blue Sky, is available from Northshire at a link that I'm entering into the chat right now. Right there. It's available from Northshire at the link in the chat. Acclaimed novelist Liza Arthur said that this book is a beautiful, stirring, and often playful tribute to life itself. While the award-winning former Vermont poet, Major Jackson said that a hardwired sense of beauty throbs through this spectacularly fresh and tender book. We are joined tonight by my good friend Barbara Morrow, the co-founder of Northshire Bookstore. Please welcome Barbara Morrow and Governor Kunin back to Northshire. I think Barb's going to start us off with a couple of questions before we move into the poetry reading.
Thank you, David. This is such a pleasure to be with all of you and to welcome back Madeleine Kunin. We're not in person, but this is it's wonderful to be able to see her and to have this opportunity to have this conversation. I'd like to start off by asking Madeleine, when did you start writing poetry?
Well, you know, there's no fixed date. I mean, when I was in high school, I wrote a few poems. For special occasions, I would write poems. But I wrote poetry more seriously in my 80s, when maybe late 70s, because there's a poem in the book about when I turned 77. So I think I began to turn inward after I retired from active politics. And so I've sort of transformed myself from a politician to a poet. And I didn't really do that consciously. It sort of developed because as a politician, you obviously have to be an extrovert. You have to be on display in a very visible way. And you tend to be more cautious about how you sound and how you look. As a writer, you tend to be more of an introvert. So that's how I began to evolve into a more thinking, quiet person. And it was fun. I enjoy writing. I had done other writing. I've been a journalist. That's what brought me to Vermont, working for a newspaper in Burlington. But poetry is different from journalism too. But I just discovered that I had things I wanted to say, and poetry was the format that seemed to fit best.
Well, we're so glad that you've done this. You've created this amazing collection. Why do you think poetry is more relevant than ever today?
Well, I think a lot of people gravitate towards poetry because they're looking for some kind of meaning. They want to take their minds off the news, which have been so powerful in this last year. I mean, the news sort of pounds at you, and poetry is a more quiet form of literature. Um, so I think people really want to be in a different space than the everyday, and to see what poets think of the world. I mean, poets do address subjects like life and death and the meaning of life and nature. So it's a different milieu which can provide comfort and distraction, certainly, from the everyday world.
Yeah, you touched on this a bit, but what do you consider the differences between being a politician and a poet and or a writer?
Well, as I alluded to, it's a more inward life, and it's you can express things that you can't as a politician. Um, I mean, as a politician, I was more cautious. I had to protect myself. I had to really think about what I was saying to make sure it didn't get me into trouble, to make sure that I was saying what I meant and not be misinterpreted. And of course, you're such a public person. But by giving a poetry reading like I am tonight, I'm a public person once again, but in a different way. Uh, Sometimes I'm almost shy about reading my poems because they do stem from a different feeling and a different thought process. But the joy of writing poetry is when you're understood, when people respond to what you write. And, you know, a woman came up to me the other day and said, I cried reading your poem and I
Oh,
laughed reading your poems. So the fact that it touched her own emotions made me feel very good that I had succeeded in linking with her in her feelings.
that's lovely. You seem unafraid of exposing your innermost feelings. It's a very personal medium.
Yes, it is. And sometimes when she told me this afterwards, I thought about it and I thought maybe I'm making myself too vulnerable, exposing myself in a way that might be embarrassing. But the fact that she had a positive response, um, that made me feel safe, that it's okay.
And how does it feel to be vulnerable on the page? Because many of your poems are very, very personal.
Well, I sort of think it's somebody else.
Ah,
I,
yeah.
I just I distance myself from it a little bit. Um, but it feels personal, but I think that's what people react to. Um, they want the poet to explain things they can't explain, or talk about things that people don't always talk about. So, you know, or even puzzle people. You think of Emily Dickinson and how she wrote very personally and very briefly. So it's still a mystery. You know, where did the words come from and how do they get on the page?
I'm always interested in the writing process. In your poems, do they flow, or do you have to search for words or ways to express yourself?
No, I have to search. And I, you know, some people think if you're a poet, the words just come to you all perfectly, and you can just be the interpreter and put them on the page the way you have them in your head. But it takes time. I write. We have a little writers group at Wake Robin where we get together and just silently write. But I usually write a first draft and then I tinker with it the next day and maybe the day after that. The best advice I ever got about writing was actually when I was a visiting fellow at Dartmouth, and a woman told me, all writing is rewriting. And I think that's what we have to remember when you put those first words down and you look at them and you're sort of horrified. How could I have written that? But then when you look at it again, you can move them around. And it's a creative process of trial and error.
Yeah, I'm sure. And you mentioned Emily Dickinson as somebody that you read. Do you have other favorite poets that you turn to?
Well, I like poets that I can understand. Some
Yeah,
modern poetry goes through different phases where the purpose is not necessarily comprehension, but a new kind of art form. Um, for a more contemporary poet, I like Elizabeth Bishop, um, and others. There's some good Vermont poets and others, but you don't want it to be too simple, but you don't want it to be so complex that you're keeping a secret. The meaning of the poem is a secret that only you can comprehend. That's not my idea of a good poet.
well, your poems are very accessible and yet complex at the same time. You have wonderful evocative images in your poems. I was wondering if you could read uh, the love poem on page 70.
Yes.
That's a lovely
My
one.
husband and I, we both moved into Wake Robin, which is a continuing care community. Over time, he became ill, and I'm in the independent living section, and he was in the skilled nursing section. And this poem is about our visits together when we saw each other regularly in his room and in his section. It's called The Love Poem. Each night I wheel you to your door with a kiss on your lips. I smile, my love, at you, generously, I think. You don't know how much I love you, you say. I do, I do. We formed a ritual of waving goodbye as I retreat slowly down the hall. At first I wave with one hand in the air, and then my arms go wild before I turn the corner, as if struck by a storm or signaling for help. We wave in tandem. You are there and I am here. The nurses now know we wave not for them, but for one another, to have and to hold the love we swore to once and forever.
That's beautiful. You examine the themes that are very prominent in this collection of love, loss, and loneliness after the death of your late husband, and also after enduring a year of COVID in isolation. That seems to, those themes seem to have inspired you to write.
Yes, I mean, we're living in unusual times. I mean, this past year and a half, no one could have predicted. And I think everyone, whether they're poets or not, is sort of processing the new experience. And COVID can be depressing because of its isolation. And now I think we feel sort of a liberation that we're now able to meet friends and be with people and socialize. And I'd like to read a poem called Blue Sky. This was sort of at the height of the COVID epidemic, or towards a little bit later. And I just was feeling down by COVID, and then I took a walk. I have time, a bushelful, no, a truckload, a storage unit full of time. Still, I portion time out carefully, almost like in the old days, except now I stretch my neck and raise my head and keep it there until it hurts to look at the blue sky. Long ago, before coronavirus, I looked at the sky for weather or at night for stars. The blue sky gave me answers by the hour. I didn't even say thank you. Yesterday, I went for a walk and gazed upward, expecting little. I looked up at the blue sky. The longer I looked, I saw more layers of blue. The blue sky had depth, a clean teacup of blue without a crack. I could see through one blue to find another blue. The longer I held my head up, blue became more blue, and I continued my walk and thanked the sky for being blue.
Mhm.
I think a lot of us have turned to nature, and when you couldn't do anything else, we're lucky in Vermont that we can go outside and breathe in spring like we're achieving now. And that is a new almost skill to stop and look at the leaves coming out in the sky and the flowers.
It's a wonderful time of year. So would you read also your poem We on page 49?
Yeah. I liked being we. We were doubles, not one but two, walking in tandem. When I was silent, you spoke. When I spoke, you listened. I drank your words as if they belonged to me. We fed each other's outpourings before we whisked them together into we, us, and ours. We is a habit you left me with, so comfortable and strong. I is skinny, it stands alone, brittle to the touch. It needs something at its side. I am alive.
Beautiful. Do you think poetry helps heal the pain of loss?
I think if you can articulate what you're feeling, express it, or even share it, it helps. It helps. If you can find words, I think that can provide comfort. And it certainly did and does for me. And, you know, that here at Wake Robin, there's a large population of women who have lost their partners. And so you can almost share this. Yes.
Sorry. Okay. You've said that your late husband gave you confidence to write, and that he was your staunch supporter and first reader. It's so moving to read your poems about your relationship with him. Perhaps we can read another one. Let's see.
You,
Let me pick one.
there's a lighthearted one called The Bed.
The Bed, yes. Let's go there.
These were my sheets and his bed. They are not the right sheets, he said, letting the corner limp down over the edge. Just tuck them in, I said, with a hint of annoyance that he didn't know better. They always fit on my bed. I said exactly what I thought, knowing that I might not be understood, or worse, offend. There was a slight knowing echo. There was a slight grating echo in our words, which we heard in different ways. In other times, with other people, it would have shredded the tie that bound them. But in this time, with the two of us, the tear was so quickly rewoven that we looked at each other and laughed.
Nice. It seems in our culture, death is mostly not spoken about, yet it is a prevalent topic in your poems. How do you think of death?
Oh, that's such a hard question and such a simple question. I think as I get older, I think more about it, but I don't want to be captured by it either. I mean, I still want to live the years that are left to me with joy and curiosity and anticipation. But I'm 87, and you know, the logical time, I'm a sort of cozying up to 90 and maybe beyond. But I think I try to appreciate the small things of life more when I can consciously do that. I mean, and I want to grab life. I want to, at times, I want to do everything: more music, more art, more books, more friendships, and pack it all in. But I guess for most people my age, it's not so much the fear of dying, it's the fear of dying badly, of suffering endlessly. So that's what I hope for, that I have an easy death and not be a burden to my family.
You have a poem called Thinking of Death on page 80. Would you like to read that one?
Okay, thank you. Being patient while I turn the pages.
It's page 80.
Yeah, I'm getting there. Thinking of death. At 86, I think of death. Not all the time, but more often than before. The pandemic exploded and covered me with ashes, sweeping the sky dark. I find myself in a box, chalk-marked old. Least likely to win the competition, I have fallen into this slot, innocently stacking up years, an accomplishment of sorts. I've lived a good life. My death will not be tragic. It's too late for that. I believe the old should go first.
Did we lose Madeleine?
Pardon me?
No, she's still going through.
Should I continue?
Yes,
Please do,
please.
yeah.
I believe the old should go first. Given a choice, the young must be saved. It is perfectly natural, except when I feel the claws of the pandemic wreath my neck and stifle my breath. So, with the care given to the pandemic people, I still feel the young should survive. Though, of course, the old first got the vaccine and were dying faster. So it's complicated. I'm afraid of the pandemic, and yet I'm not. So I express a lot of different thoughts in that one poem.
Mhm. Well, poetry is ideal for that, right? You know, it's
Yeah,
yes,
and you have
expressing.
to leave room.
Hmm. And just opposite that poem, Home Alone.
Yes. Maybe before that, I'll read a lighter poem
Okay.
about my cat.
Oh, that's a wonderful one. Yes.
I have a cat from the Humane Society, and she's turned out to be very knowledgeable and very affectionate. But like all cats, she definitely has a mind of her own. But she does inspire me to write. This poem is called Cat. My cat plumps herself on the straight arm of my sofa, feet tucked neatly under her coat, purring her song. He invites me to smooth her, to feel her pillow under my hand. I'm not invited inside her thoughts. She sits mute as a Buddha carved from stone. Whoosh! She streaks to the next room as if on fire, sees something I can't see, hears something I can't hear. Composed again, even sedate, she claims proximity, sits where I sit, walks where I walk, climbs across my lap and seats herself regally by my side. She stares intelligently at me as if ready for a chat. Her coin-round pupils are circled in gold. She holds her gaze until I give up. A yawn unclips her red mouth, her pointy tiger teeth, a beast. Her mouth closes, her head is lowered. Ah, we are companions once again. Good kitty, I say in my baby voice, and think I'm falling in love. Until she paws herself onto the dining table as if it were her place to sit across from me. Off, I yell, nothing. Down, I shout, nothing. She is like an Egyptian statue buried with Tutankhamun. Impatient, irritated, I exercise my two-handed superiority and drag her down, pulling against her needle claws. She finds a chair that fits her form and sleeps the day away. She is a night creature, silent in her roaming until crash, I startle. What is it? Tablecloth askew, candlesticks toppled, candles unhinged. My sweet cat, having terrified herself, has slipped into oblivion. Together again we sit on the sofa, her flank wedded to my thigh. Her small chin lifted high rests on my arm. I feel her cool breath hover over my willing wrist. You're such a good kitty, I purr. Lying in bed at night, I wait for her usual visit. She gives no hint of her stealthy approach. A quick paw lands on my chest, then another until 4 paws have stepped over my body. She plants herself on the other side and searches until she finds a nest between my twigged legs. She curls herself into a coiled rope, no beginning or end. We share our bodily warmth, hers intermingled with mine, searching for a separate sleep. I dare not move. I
That's
don't know what
wonderful.
the last line in that poem.
I love that. Um, so your poem, Home Alone, reflects the groundlessness we all felt during the pandemic.
Yes. What page did you say it was at?
It's on page 81.
Yeah. I think, I live alone. I'm at Wake Robin, which is a community, but I'm still alone in my, what they call a cottage. And here it goes, Home Alone. I think too much about myself when I'm home alone. No one reminds me to get up at 8 or turn off the light at 11. I sleep past the alarm and feel remorse for lost minutes, even hours. I used to be punctual, arriving in good time for dentists, doctors, and friends. The hands of the clock held me fast and marked my movements around the day. The pandemic has sickened my clock. It can no longer tell me what day it is. I luxuriate in being timeless, living alone, except when I open my eyes to my jittery television screen and the head of a fully gowned nurse appears, and who tells me she has just finished her 10-hour shift and is going back to work.
So how did you continue to stay connected during the pandemic?
My children called me and I called them, and sometimes we could go for walks. I'm very fortunate. 3 of my 4 children live in Vermont nearby, and my daughter lives in New York. But even now, we talk on the phone very often. We talk most evenings, and I would walk with my other children. And the telephone became very important, even with friends. Sometimes I just look at my contact list and say, I haven't heard from so-and-so for a long while. And they would do that with me too. So that was a saving grace. And then actually my cat. I hate to become one of those little old ladies who relate to their cats as human beings, but this cat is almost a person. And it's nice when you walk in the door that the cat is there. And I would read a lot. I'd watch the news a lot, especially before the election and afterwards. So I tried to stay in contact, but most recently, the dining room in Wake Robin, where we eat our meals, except those who do takeout, just opened about 2 weeks ago. Up until that time, we would get our meals delivered in a brown paper bag at the front door, and the food in the cardboard containers usually was pretty dried out and not terribly attractive. But it wasn't just the food, it was the company. that first night, the conversation seemed to explode, and people were so happy, and the staff were so happy. They'd been lonely. So we realized what we'd gained, and we, for the first time, realized too what we had lost.
Mhm. You mentioned watching the news. How are you feeling these days about politics? You've obviously immersed yourself in politics for a good part of your life, and then decided to retire. As you say, you knew that there were other things in life that you wanted to do besides being governor. Um, what's your feeling about what's going on in our world today?
Well, there's both good news and bad news. I mean, I'm involved in politics and helping other people run for office, especially women. I founded an organization called Emerge. We're one of 24 states that have a program that teaches and coaches women to run for office. And it's really been highly successful. So I'm still engaged on the peripheries, and I'm still engaged in how strongly I feel about things. I mean, the good news is that Biden is president, that we have a Democrat, and in my biased opinion, I think he's doing a terrific job in addressing the big issues like COVID, like the economy, like women's issues. You know, the fact that his programs have cut childhood poverty in half, or will do that. I mean, that's phenomenal. So I'm very happy about that.
Mhm.
What's disturbing is the voter suppression, the big lie that Trump and his fellows continue to adhere to, that he actually won the election. So it's a time to be hopeful, but it's a time where we still have to be alert, and we still have to be strong enough to oppose some of the negative things that are happening in our democracy.
Do you still see yourself as being an active participant? I mean, now that we're able to let our guard down, so to speak.
Very
do
much
you-
so. Yeah,
yeah.
I also write every 2 or 3 weeks. I write a more political column for an online newspaper called VT Digger, Vermont Digger, and that's kind of fun. I still want to express myself in a political activist way. And I used to do a commentary for the public radio station, but they stopped doing that. So that's why I went to VT Digger, where I can also be more partisan, which is kind of fun.
Yeah.
I felt a little constrained when I had to be very careful about getting Washington upset, the Trump administration upset about what I was writing.
You have a poem, I Can't Breathe, on page 86, which is very, very powerful. Would you care to read that?
Yes, like everybody else, I was very affected by the murder of George Floyd. It just and the marching and the protests. And in this poem, I sort of wish I were out there in the streets. I can't breathe. I'm falling into fear, unwinding the ties that bind, are splitting into shreds that float from a virus-infested sky. A black man couldn't breathe because a white man pressed down on his neck. Mama, he cried before he died after more than 9 slow minutes. I sit in my chair here at home, where I tried to move close to where they marched down pulsating streets, opening their red mouths to needle-pointed smoke, choking on injustice.
Mm.
I still want to be in the action. So there are limits, and COVID was certainly one of them. But I admire the people who were in the streets and are making a difference.
Well, you were at, I know, at the Women's March in Montpelier after the 2016 election, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, and gave a very rousing speech, as I recall.
Yeah, it was a wonderful event. I mean, everybody was there and it was joyful, and we felt that we had the power to do things, and we knew things would be negative and harsh and hard, but we couldn't have anticipated how bad it actually turned out.
Yes, it's hard sometimes to stay hopeful when things like that are happening around you. For there may be people who are watching who aren't familiar with your early life and how you came to this country. You've written about it in your poem Voyage, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that and then read the poem.
Well, thank you. Well, I was born in Switzerland, and we came to the United States in June of 1940, and my father had died, and my brother and my mother and I made the journey to America. And, you know, Switzerland remained neutral, but we didn't know that in 1940. And being Jewish, my mother was very worried because Switzerland was surrounded by Nazi occupied countries. So we came to America. And this is a poem that I started writing recently as I reflected on that time. It's called Voyage. Last night, I thought about my mother's voyage to America, what she faced by herself, saying goodbye to all the relatives at the Zurich train station, accepting prettily wrapped boxes of chocolate from everyone and given to me on the train to carry safely in a sack heavy for a 6-year-old. Left behind on the train, how awful. Did my brother make this up, or did this happen? Or did this happen that Nazi soldiers walked through the train questioning everyone? The conductor vouched for my mother, having met her regularly on the commuter train in Zurich. I remember how scratchy the blanket was in the sleeping car. That's all. Waiting in Genoa for our boat to arrive. Our names on the manifest with an H for Hebrew, I found out later. I looked out the window from the top floor of the hotel and saw, we thought, Japanese soldiers lined up in formation 10 days before Italy entered the war. My mother did not unclothe her fear to us. We found our cabin already occupied by 2 women and a baby. We settled in somehow, lugging the big blue trunk, which stood upright and opened sideways. Safely inside our cabin on the SS Manhattan, I was delighted later by the new taste of apple pie a la mode and playing shuffleboard on the tilting ship. We lined up alphabetically at the pier under the letter M for May with a couple named Muller who became our friends and gave each of us a beautiful book every Christmas. Finally, cousins Fred and Irene Kahn found us. She, already American, wearing a red hat, red shoes, red pocketbook, opened our eyes wide. Muslin, you have to have coils. All the coils in America have coils. We repeated her words for years, silly with laughter. It's true, we really were, but it was wonderful to be met at the pier. And my cousin Ferdinand found us a hotel for our first night in America. And children adapt just like immigrants are doing now. And we were different from immigrants who were coming now. We were white, we came from a Western European country. We didn't have to go through all the trials and tribulations that immigrants are going through today.
Mm. And do you have recall of those early years?
I do a little bit. We somehow had friends, and we landed for that first summer on the beach, and we lived in a boarding house, but it was lovely to be on the beach. And I found a girl my age, and she asked me my name, and I understood her and gave her my name. And then I went running back to my mother and said, I can speak English. So I remember those first words, but children adapt very quickly, obviously faster than their parents.
Yeah, yeah. And what a life you have led. It's just very inspiring, I must say. A couple of other poems that I'd love you to read are about little daily struggles that we all experience. One is called Earring on page 85. I thought that was really amusing.
Okay, earrings. I put my earrings on most mornings during this eyeless pandemic that doesn't see whether I'm wearing silver hoops or teardrop pearls. Some mornings I get impatient with my earring exercise when I can't find the hole in my earlobe to plunge my little dagger through. When I miss my target, a pinpoint of blood ekes out. A prelude to infection? I worry. Are the openings in my ears are the openings in my ears shutting, not wanting to work anymore? They know I am the only one to see them. I look in the mirror to make sure that one earring hasn't dropped off. I can't be lopsided, not now. With two earrings hinged in place, I must appear balanced.
That's so great. Do you remember how you were inspired to write that poem? Or just
A frustrating morning trying to put my earrings on, I'm sure.
You also have poems about your travels to Sicily. There's a lovely one called Sicilian Sky on page 91.
Yeah, 2 years ago, I went with some friends, and my friends were artists, and I basically painted, and I took walks and then came back and wrote. Sicilian sun. The Sicilian sun melts my argument against myself, heat coating my body with forgiving warmth that pierces my bones. I search for who I am, who I may become before death drags me deep. My eyes browse the surface of sea and sky. I have loved, but not long enough. I have wept when love left me. I rest on the line where the sea drops from the sky. I slip into the water, deep, cold and black. I flail against the wall, gulp against my will, fight against the pull, thrust up again. I sputter for breath, blink at the light, reach for the sun and breathe.
Hmm. Another one that stood out for me was plum-colored gloves. The topics sometimes that you choose are just so unusual, and I like this one for that reason.
Can you remind me of the page?
Yes, I can. Page 42
Okay.
or 43, I guess it is. 43.
Yeah, I have it. Plum-colored gloves. My daughter gave me plum-colored leather gloves a year ago, made in Hungary, baby soft. I bring them together, palm against palm. I place one bare hand over the gloved other, slip-covered bones stretched taut. They've been in the box for almost a year, for safety. Gloves are easy to lose. They fall out of pockets, abandoning their mates. I've held one onto widowed gloves too long, hoping for couplings. Now at 83, I take my new gloves out and pull them on like a new skin. The sad part about the story is I did lose those gloves. I was getting out of a taxi cab in New York City, and I must have had them in my lap, and they fell on the street without my knowing it. The taxi drove off before I could look for them. So it's sad to lose plum-covered gloves given by your loving daughter.
Yes, indeed. Can we turn to a couple of poems about your observations of nature and the changing seasons? I've chosen Lilacs on page 17, which is very topical for this time of year.
Yes, lilacs. The lilacs were patient all year, packaged into small Ziploc bags that allowed them privacy in preparation for spring exposure. They waited until ripeness burst them open, releasing their lungs and dangling their colors in the warming air. How did they know when it was time to offer their scent? How did they know when to shrivel into brown kernels that keep their secrets and emit nothing?
So you have said that taking walks was something that you did during COVID and that it helped. Would you come back and write a poem, or do these poems come from other times?
I don't really know. I think, well, evidently the blue sky inspired me after a walk,
Mhm.
and just enjoying the lilacs and their generosity inspired me to write. But it can just be a little pinpoint of light, and then you have to develop it, and that takes obviously more time. You don't go for a walk, sit down and write a poem. You have to work at it a little bit, but not too hard, so it doesn't sound labored. It's supposed to
Mhm.
sound spontaneous, but I think most writers know that to sound spontaneous, you have to really work hard.
Takes a lot of work. Are you still writing?
Yes, but not as often. But I do write about a poem every 2 weeks or so, and I write the column for Vermont Digger.
Right.
So I try to keep the gears moving.
What, how do you decide whether to write a poem or a prose piece when you are sitting down to write?
Well, I go through phases. I give myself a deadline when I write the prose piece. And I have to think of an appropriate subject matter. And so I need the 2 or 3 weeks in between the prose pieces to sort of let things develop. And the poem sort of pushes itself into me that I have to write something.
Mhm.
I think when I wrote the poems for the book, I gave myself a deadline, and that helped. I think, you can't wait for what we call inspiration. Like yesterday, I went to a writing group and I really didn't know what to write. But I sat down and thought and sat down and thought, and I did write a poem.
Hmm.
I don't know if it's any good, which is what we always self-criticize, but at least I wrote something and I can rewrite it and hopefully make it worthwhile.
You said that your husband, your late husband, was always your supporter and first reader, probably first and last reader, right? Before a poem was published.
Not necessarily the last reader. I would share some of my poems with friends.
Hmm.
Yes, but he gave me confidence. I don't know, it's hard to explain, but the fact that he encouraged me and gave me positive feedback made it more possible for me to become vulnerable by revealing my feelings and emotions.
Hmm. So nice. David, do we have any questions before we leave?
We do. We've got one question. And so if there's any other questions, please type them in the chat. But so far we've only got one. That's from Susan. And Governor Kunin, she asks if there's a particular time of day that you write your poetry.
I used to think the morning was best, and sometimes I still do, but one time I was trying to get to sleep and some thoughts came to me and I was afraid I'd lose them. So I got up and put them down on my laptop. Another time, fairly recently, some thoughts came to me and I didn't get up. And next morning, I had no idea what I was thinking. So I've learned to write at different times of day. We can't, I tell this to others and I tell it to myself, you can't wait for the right moment. I mean, there is some discipline to writing. And you just have to say, I'm going to do this. And then you can always go back and revise, as I said at the beginning of this discussion. In writing, there's usually a black crow sitting on your shoulder saying, no good, no good, no good. And you just have to shoo that bird away and continue.
That's such a human response. We all can relate to that, I think.
Yes, yes. We're very self-critical, at least most of us.
Yes, indeed.
I'm afraid we are out of time, but there is one last question here from Denise and a comment. She says, your book made me really reflect on mortality and inspired me to write and have more life experiences while I'm young. Thank you so much. And she also wants to know if there is a favorite poem of yours own in your book.
No, I don't dare do that. I might offend the other poems.
I love your responses, Madeleine. You combine such humor with complexity and feeling, and I am so grateful for this opportunity to have been with you this evening. Thank you so much.
Well, my pleasure. It's been great to be with you and have this extended conversation. Thank you.
Absolutely. We look forward to having you come back in person to the Northshire.
I look forward to that too.
Wonderful.
Thank you both so much. You can order a copy of Red Kite, Blue Sky at northshire.com. I've put the link in the chat a couple of times. Have a wonderful evening.
Great.
Thank you
This has been
so
lovely.
much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.